Today I am joined by a really good panel. So I'll start with some introduction first, and then we go into what we're going to talk about today. Bhakti, do you want to?
Yeah, sure. I'm Bhakti. I'm Chief of Staff at Dovu. We are tokenizing real-world assets, and we're starting with sustainability assets, specifically carbon credits.
Hello, I'm Ed Monckton. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at Agridex, and we are an all-in-one integrated digital marketplace for agricultural goods, but powered by blockchain, both in the payments and also disclosure of environmental and sustainability standards.
Hey everyone, my name is Radoslav Dragov, Head of Validation for Open Forest Protocol. OFP, as we call it, is a Web3-based end-to-end platform that allows forest projects anywhere in the world to be onboarded. So essentially we measure, report, and verify the impact of these projects, and based on that impact, we mint carbon credits, which of course can be sold. The perspective I'm coming in is nature-based solutions as it pertains to the carbon market. So thank you very much for having me here.
Thank you. Tim?
Hi everyone. My name is Tim Sabanov, CTO at Zuma, where we focus on that it's getting tinier gap between world of digital assets and traditional finance system, where we essentially kind of try to solve that problem or build that bridge by building out-of-the-box solutions that bigger enterprises can use in order to offer digital assets to their customer base. From kind of a bit about my perspective and why I'm here, we have been focused on environmental sustainability for years now at Zuma, and all those years of learning have resulted in us building and launching our product Zuma Oxygen earlier this year, a product that focuses on environmental sustainability, but more directly on digital assets and the environmental impact. So essentially a product that allows companies to calculate what the impact is and then also appropriately through one platform mitigate.
Thanks, Tim. And my name is Amelie Arras. I'm also from Zumo here. I'm very delighted to be moderating this panel because it's a subject that is quite core to me, the company, but also to me as a person. Notably, to put the panel into context, we are looking from a global perspective to limit the global warming at 1.5 degrees. We know that blockchain has got a tremendous opportunity to bring some transparency to some of the markets, such as carbon credit, and what our panel going to be talking about. We know also, personally, I strongly believe that the crypto sector has got a tremendous opportunity to play a strong part into the transition to renewable energy. Would this be if the crypto sector is collaborating? Now, the crypto sector, in my opinion also, has not been perhaps like the one who is making the most of like voluntary buying carbon credits on a voluntary basis. And now we're seeing that there are some regulations that are coming in, notably in Europe. There is a first industry-specific regulation that's coming in called MiCA that looks at, that asks all of the crypto service provider to disclose certain sustainability indicators. Now this is just the first of a move, so where voluntary was, now we're going into like more regulated. But in here we've got some really strong perspective from a wide range of areas. So Bhakti, I'm going to start with you to kind of like, for us, like to paint the picture of what do you see the state of the market from a corporate perspective?
Yeah, of course. So we are interested in helping corporates to reduce their carbon footprint. Obviously, they'll have to lower their emissions, which they are doing very slowly, but they do have net zero targets. And then the remaining set of emissions that they cannot eliminate, they will need to offset. So there is a huge market opportunity. What we are hearing, unfortunately, is that just as in the space of carbon emissions reductions, lots of companies are being advised by their advisory firms just to pay fines. So regulation is going to play a really key role in making companies do good things. Consumer pressure isn't enough, and regulations are going to need to be tighter, have heftier penalties, and kind of slowly, I think once more and more companies start to move towards sustainability practices, change will happen. Currently, it's only if there's like a good business case for being sustainable that companies will be doing that. So we're sort of waiting and seeing and hoping for the best, but as more and more regulations come in, that should start shifting things.
Thanks, Bhakti. I'm going to turn to you, actually, Rado, because you bring the perspective from nature-based solution. So what do you see? Who mostly are your customers, and how do you see it from your side?
Yeah, just looking at the voluntary carbon market on a macro picture, the last few years has been a bit of a roller coaster. 2020 was an inflection point, and we saw that prices and volume of transactions just skyrocketed. And there are many reasons for that, but mainly climate change is undeniable now, and many of the corporates had big net zero commitments. So essentially they have to buy carbon credits in order to, well, negate their carbon footprint. And that created a feeding frenzy, but like anything, when you have more interest, then you have greater scrutiny. And what happened is, well, there was an investigation in a number of projects. Many of them were nature-based projects. And they found out that, well, these projects weren't what they said on what they claimed, and they overestimated their impact by a lot. And that created, a just massive reduction in trust and therefore prices. So everything kind of went down between 2022 and 2023. But if we zoom in specifically nature-based solutions or carbon credits from nature-based solutions, we see that the projects which were, it was easier, they call ARR projects, we don't have time to get into them, but long story short is they're very easy to quantify, and it's more legit to prove their impact. And actually, prices increase in that specific subsection of the voluntary carbon market, which shows that, well, interest in carbon credits, it's not a fad, it's real, but now companies who are buying those are much more discerning, so they're looking for higher quality and much higher standards than before. So if you can provide that, prices are increasing, so yeah, that's what any company in this space should be aiming for. Thanks.
It's interesting. So we see like the corporate issue, like in regulation, people paying fine. I'm going to turn to you, Edward. Do you see? Is there a segregation between like the Western world and more developing economies into a state of play here?
Yes, thank you. I think there is. Looking at a slightly different end of the telescope, with you, we deal a lot with the developing world, and that's where we feel like we can add the most amount of value to the supply chain. And a few things that you should bear in mind is where there is possibly the most room for improvement on environmental and sustainable and governance standards, where you can deliver the most systemic change, but also you've got a radically different set of priorities and your stakeholders you're trying to reach, and also we've got to recognise that from our ivory tower in the West that they have a choice. It's not only us, and there are actors and other people who we are and would see ourselves in strategic competition with, who will engage with lower standards and better rates. And so I think the power of blockchain and the approach that we try and take is making it as easy as possible to comply and to demonstrate the value of meeting these standards, whether that's the premium you can get for not using a particular kind of fertilizer or gaining organic status or Rainforest Alliance. Just the very basic standards that you can meet is demystifying that and providing a unified language for all those metrics to be pulled together, and then rather than dictating on people, because the current system, and I know we talked about Mika earlier, the sustainable finance disclosure regulations ask for 1,100 data points. And actually the sort of second order effect of that is that people just say, well, it's not worth investing in Africa because I'm just going to get a red flag immediately. Whereas if you look at it in a slightly more nuanced manner when you're using blockchain to disclosure, you can really meaningfully track improvement, which is a far better way of looking at it. And therefore you're not having other actors who are happy to run assets dirty, let's say, but you're saying, well, no, we'll take you as you are, and then be a stakeholder on that journey when it comes to getting investment into these parts of.
It's very interesting. And from your perspective, Tim, we talked about the corporate, but you're more onto the crypto sector. What do you see yourself?
I guess I can give a bit of insight when it comes to the Oxygen product, where we started by targeting UK crypto companies. At the same time, we recently started developing a feature that helps CASPs, so crypto asset service providers in AU, to tackle the whole challenge of MiCA and indicators and disclosures that they need to sort out. So we have talked to companies within UK, within Europe, a bit within US as well. And I think we can broadly, to reiterate something that Bhakti already mentioned, we can broadly separate them in two categories, right? The first category is very old school, old fashioned. They don't care about sustainability. They see sustainability as, well, it hurts their bottom line because they need to do something about it. So it's a cost. Obviously, those organizations aren't proactively gonna act towards sustainable goals. So they'll do the bare minimum. They'll do what the regulators force them to do. And yes, we have heard that they'll rather just pay the fines, or they'll wait for first fines to come into sector, and then they'll decide how to tackle it. Maybe just paying the fine is good enough, right? Sadly, there is that group. But on the opposite side, we also have a group that is full of companies that are a bit more progressive, right? They understand that sustainability is something that is a long game. It doesn't carry any immediate payoff straight away. So, I mean, if your organization adopts a very good environmental sustainability policies, or tackles a project, or starts working actively in that direction, there's probably a couple of good PR articles you can get out of it. But when it comes to immediate payoffs, that's it, right? But when companies start to think in the span of years and decades, it becomes very obvious that organizations that are progressive right now are not only looking at how to satisfy the regulator, they're trying to understand the regulator, and they're then looking forward. So what can they do next? How can they become market leaders within their own sector? And to your point earlier, Amelie, I think blockchain has an amazing potential, but sadly, that potential wasn't focused on sustainability so far, or even worse, it was actively avoided because it was such a difficult conversation to be had, right? When the whole Bitcoin is going to burn down the earth, how are you going to talk about sustainability if you're working in crypto? I think that is now changing, and we are talking to companies that want to do better, maybe don't know how to do better, especially when it comes to MiCA. Majority of them don't even know what the sustainability aspect of that is. And there is enough that needs to be said about education, but things are changing for better. Now, the change won't come overnight. I think there's like multiple factors, and regulators definitely are a pretty big factor playing into that, kind of pushing the change towards progressive. At the same time, culture is changing. I think behaviors and demands of consumers are also changing. So it's changing for better, but not as fast as it could.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. I think I'll pick up on some of the points that you have mentioned, especially like, so we all know that blockchain has got a huge amount of like potential to bring transparency to this market. You mentioned trust. At some point, you mentioned PR articles. To me, my alarm bell is like, boom, boom, greenwashing straight away. So I'm quite interested here because the carbon market in itself had some massive trust issue. If we look at the past, I mean, like I know certainly like a French con man that has stolen millions and millions by using the carbon market, the inefficiencies in the carbon market. You mentioned that there is a bit of a how can I trust the data? How can I trust the impact? Very keen to hear how big trust is either a challenge or an opportunity here for the carbon market.
If I can jump in, just because my first career was in PR, so reputation is kind of my jam. I think what's really interesting, and I think Tim, you mentioned that that one of the immediate payoffs is you might get a couple of nice PR articles. I think companies are shying away from actually talking about the positive environmental stuff that they're doing, and actually it's shifting more into CSR. So how can it be like a community initiative? We can just funnel money into a project, we can report on it in our annual report, but we're not going to talk about it externally because we are concerned about the risk of that investment being found to be a fraud, even though we didn't know that to begin with. And I think that's where the blockchain element comes in. If we can prove the actors who were involved in verifying and creating those assets throughout the process, being able to revoke that access if it turns out that they've become bad actors, and showing that level of transparency beyond just putting it on blockchain, because I think that's kind of like an easy answer. Just if it's on blockchain, it's transparent. But then you think about your corporate buyers, your head of sustainability, even retail investors who want to offset their crypto portfolios or just kind of traveling around enjoying their lives. I think there's like another piece of work that needs to happen to make that visible and accessible and understandable, and part of that is putting in common standards, common languages, enabling it, making it possible for methodologies to be compared, and just kind of doing an education piece alongside everything and putting it on blockchain as well.
So I think I agree, and the heart of that is this tension between blockchain being, or Web3 being inherently decentralized, but then trying to persuade people to meet you at centralized standards, and how you enable them to do that voluntarily. I know that the carbon market's very similar with the standards that you expect in food or organic products as well, and leveraging the ability to collaborate that a decentralized Web3 gives you, so that you can plug in those verifiable standards to a common picture, but without driving it from the top, is really powerful.
Just one thing that I'd add is the current carbon market is entirely dependent on trust. So if something is issued by one of the big registries, Gold Standard, Vera, which cost a lot to get and take lots of time and are very inefficient, how can we move from that to like this space of collaborative and earned trust, while also building in opportunities for grey areas and for people to make mistakes, and then kind of walk back and correct those mistakes rather than just cancelling people.
Jumping on this that you've just said, so you said like the carbon market is currently like relying on trust. It's the standards. So my understanding, and please do correct me if I'm wrong, was that the tokenizing carbon credit would enable more capital into some of the project where it would be more, could be, because it's too costly to get to these standards, right? So how does the space balance this, getting to the standards, getting the right amount of capital? Big questions. Here we go, sorry.
I can say how we have approached the problem of trust in general, because what we are doing at Open Forest Protocol is an alternative to Vera or Gold Standard. So we have our methodology, which is very much inspired by those methodologies, but for lack of a better word, we've removed all the unnecessary bureaucracy, and we've leveraged new technology, not just blockchain, but also remote sensing. I won't say AI, everybody says AI. But you leverage that technology to make the entire process much more accessible and much more efficient. I think the problem of trust, again, can be an opportunity, not just a challenge, if you're being very transparent. And we've done something that you might call radical transparency. essentially all the information that's collected on the ground about the projects is publicly available. So you can actually go, it's atlas.openforestprotocol.org. So you can see we have more than 200 forest projects around the world, and you can see where they're situated, who has developed them. But just as importantly, you can see all the data that's collected on the ground by the auditors. And you can also see, you have full reports on who has audited that particular project. And again, you don't have to trust just Open Forest Protocol. That's how it works in the legacy system, Vera, gold standard. You trust, okay, Vera is good, most corporates trust them, so you just go with it. It's not transparent. And we think, okay, even if you trust us, Open Forest Protocol, you can do your due diligence and you can go and check all the information. Maybe you're not happy with it. And the blockchain part, of course, is having all that information stored on a blockchain so you can actually trace it back to the project itself. So I think, yeah, just being super transparent with how you approach things is kind of the way you rebuild trust.
Tim, would you like to add anything?
No, I agree. I mean, I was quite active in blockchain space with the first ICO boom, and the solution to all the problems was just put it on blockchain and that's it, right? Because it's a blockchain, it's transparent. I think a lot needs to be done about the fact that data is on blockchain doesn't make it transparent. It just means that everything is on blockchain, right? Fine. What happens next? How do you trust that data? You get back to, as you are doing, right? How far down the supply chain can you actually trace all the events? How can you trace those? How can you trust those events actually being logged? Who logs them? It's a whole question of, which is quite an interesting challenge that blockchain can also help to solve, and is solving, of digital identity, not identity on individual level, but enterprises and their identities. And how do you actually know that a wallet, let's say, on blockchain is the right wallet? And there are standards, there are protocols, but I think for us to get to a point where we have a unified, let's say, a protocol, there's a lot of unification that needs to happen. I hope that's the future towards we are going, right? Even simply thinking of digital identity and all the countries using the same smart contracts, the same standards and everything, it becomes incredibly easy and transparent, and everything is super easy to manage and upgrade. I don't think we are there just yet. I think we are now solving individual pieces. Even Vera, I think there was, a research a couple of years ago about how many of the audited projects that have gotten a stamp were actually fake, right? So a good process, a good standard doesn't necessarily save the problem straight away, but building a protocol and supply chain and something where you can actually establish trust, because you're giving all your methodologies, everything that you have learned is something that you can share with whoever the consumer is and ask him to do the due diligence with you. I think that's the right approach.
Thank you. Loads of challenges for the space. Any other challenges that you would like to discuss before I move on to the opportunities?
I can just quickly add the challenge. Again, it is strictly speaking our area of focus, which is more supply side. And I don't remember who mentioned, but yeah, the problem with Vera Gold Standard is it's very expensive to validate, measure, report, and verify those projects, which leads to only the biggest of big projects qualify. You need over 1,000 hectares in order to qualify for that, and very few people, organizations have access to more than 1,000 hectares. So again, the approach here is you leverage new technology, again, remote sensing, collect data on the ground, and make the entire process much more inexpensive, so you can involve many more people around the world who want to be involved in that market. So if you have 5 hectares, in Kenya, for example, well, you can be now onboarded because you don't have to pay so much money that you won't get anything out of it. You will lose money because you pay more for verification. So reducing the price of MRV, or measurement, reporting, and verification, is a way to make the entire process much more accessible and involve many more people in the voluntary carbon market. So, yeah.
Thank you. I'll then start asking about the opportunities. So we mentioned, I think that was you, Edward, complexity into regulation in terms of challenge. You mentioned standardization. You mentioned trust, and you mentioned education as well. If we start with standardization and interoperability, Bhakti, can I turn to you?
You can. Well, that's what we do at Dovu. I think a really good analogy that I've heard from Tollem, who is also working in this space, is that currently everyone is building things on blockchain, and it's like having a supermarket where there's no consistency between types of containers or labeling or anything, and it's just a bit of a mess. And so that's kind of the work that we're focused on, is how can we build an infrastructure layer that enables everyone to input information and for the output to become interoperable. So that's a massive challenge. I'm not saying we're the only people that are going to solve it, but that's the bit that we're really interested in. And then doing an education piece on top of it to make it possible for people to understand what is in the supermarket and what they should be looking for. And then another opportunity is also to bring in different stakeholders. So Savimbo is a really great biodiversity project based in the Amazon rainforest, and they really advocate for the indigenous people who don't have the land rights because land titling was removed in Colombia, but they do still technically have ownership over the land. There are chiefs in the tribes who you have to get on board and then make sure there's equitable distribution of payments that come through. And that's, again, where blockchain can come in. So it's, I think, Edward, you spoke about using it for payments as well, and I think that's another element.
Thank you.
I think there's an enormous opportunity, as just that there's complexity with regulation, but one of the core things we're trying to do is lower the barrier for access for agricultural trade. And if you're lowering the cost of transacting in the developing world, and you're getting people to engage with blockchain and bypass a lot of the intermediaries in a way that landlines were leapfrogged to mobiles in a large part of the developing world, that you leapfrog their bank accounts to a wallet, and giving people access to these services, but doing it in a way that that demonstrates and enables you to think about the environmental impact of what you're doing first, and the value of taking it seriously. I know we talked about micro and SFDR earlier, but I think that the United Nations, as far as a canopy, the Sustainable Development Goal 12, its metric for success is more companies are reporting on and thinking about what their environmental impact is. And so building the framework and the tools for people to do that with a very low bar of entry is what the power of what blockchain can deliver and what we're trying to do.
Following up question on this, so with SFDR, any standard setters, so the ISSB, for example, International Sustainability Standard Board, or any other standard setters, do you feel that they need to be more educated in terms of what the blockchain, or how they need to adapt some of the standards to specifically the blockchain industry or the crypto industry?
I think so, but I think the crypto industry has also got a lot of work to do to bring themselves in, be slightly less esoteric. It was built in a sort of counterculture way, but now we're trying to unlock the power in a really meaningful way to solve real-world problems. And you're not going to bring people on board with that if you're using exclusionary language or you're making it impenetrable. It has to be made as simple and as accessible as possible. As simple things as user interface. It's got to look and feel like a banking app or a website that you're able to interact with. It can't feel like you're taking a risk, because crypto has had a bad reputation in the past.
Jargon of sustainability meets blockchain jargon. Dream coming true there.
Fully aligned.
On your side, Rado, you mentioned some of the challenges, but what do you see some of the strongest opportunities are?
Yes, opportunities, I think, I already mentioned some, and they go without saying. Some of them are remote sensing, AI, using to make the entire process of measurement, reporting, and verification cheaper, involve more people. But I think we can also use that opportunity to involve more people in the entire carbon market, or have a more holistic view of how how we measure or how we issue carbon credits, because carbon credits, so 1 carbon credit is 1 ton of CO2 captured, and kind of like GDP is a very useful but a very crude metric as well. So if we raise the standards and we look at the wider impact, if you have a project that captures carbon, well, look at, is it increasing biodiversity or is it actually decreasing it? Is it helping the local community or actually it's not? So taking all these things into account is very important. And I mean, we don't have that much time, so I'm not gonna get into how OFP does that, but I think, yeah, having a more holistic view and involving more people is the way to kind of raise standards, which, you know, they're nice to have, but they'll become the requirement in the future, yeah.
I mean, I like hearing this myself. Tim, you mentioned education. So before I open the question to the panel, would you like to touch on the opportunities on the education?
Yeah, I think Edward already touched it, right? So it's, I think inherently humans are good, but you don't know what you don't know and you don't care about what you know, right? So how do we solve that? And I think it's everyone's responsibility, everyone's, like us sitting here, everyone at this event, to make sure they participate in discussions, in panels like this. I think we need to be very honest and willing to have uncomfortable conversations, so calling out when something isn't okay. So blockchain isn't good just because it's potentially better when it comes to environmental sustainability than traditional financial systems or more transparent. There still is that element of it makes an impact, let's address it, right? So let's stop with finger pointing and let's kind of get on the same page. And I think that requires patience and a lot of education within the industry. Regulators need to be educated and consumers at the end of the and it takes time. It's not going to happen overnight, but I mean the fact that we are having these discussions is probably a good sign.
Amazes me because I find consumers being actually quite educated from a sustainability perspective. But yeah, talking about finger pointing, yesterday I heard like, well, AI is worst. I was like, okay, fair enough, yeah. So I'll open the question here to anyone. There you go.
I don't know if you can hear me. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Thank you for a very, very interesting panel. You mentioned greenwashing and you mentioned companies just paying the fines. I'm curious, what is all of your opinions on how to make companies and sort of everybody in this space, I suppose, just think bigger, like be more innovative, not just think about can we buy the carbon, and I forgot the word, carbon points, like just actually go for more innovations. Like crypto, blockchain is sort of, people think about it as the space of innovations, and yet it feels like in terms of sustainability, there is so much more innovation that could happen. How do you think this can be incentivized?
Yeah. Anyone would like to take this question?
I'll take a stab at it. Well, you cannot forcing them. Well, you can have new regulation that forces them to do so, and even then they'll try to avoid it. But I think if we look at the long history of corporate social responsibility or sustainability, we see that, let's say in the 80s, it was kind of a joke. It was definitely a fad, more talking, more PR than actions. But with time and peer pressure from society and people voting with their wallets, you see that, wow, this is now serious. You have your chief corporate social responsibility officer, and that puts pressure on companies to make these net zero commitments, which whether they'll commit to them, that's whether it will become true, we don't know. But again, I'm a rational optimist, but even I know it takes time for these things. So just, individual, whatever you can do, put more pressure, and eventually these companies will actually react, but it will take some time. So,
It's a really good question, and I agree with what you're saying as well, Rado. But I think for us, the key is the consumer, to put pressure on on those companies who are behaving in such a manner, and then putting the tools that blockchain affords into the hands of the consumer to check the standards, check the transparency, and lower the bar to access like that is what's going to drive systemic change, I think.
I think also just making mediocre okay. I think there's like everyone's looking for the silver bullet, everyone's looking for the perfect standard, and it's just let's just lower our expectations. Let's start doing some stuff. Let's accept that stuff's not going to be perfect, but something's better than nothing. And then also just having a clear focus on the people, in the global south whose livelihoods are being affected, whose lives are being affected, and having a more human connection, I think would be helpful.
Maybe to add, we said regulator as a change driver. I think regulator is always keeping up or trying to keep up with technology and failing, right? And that's simply the role of the regulator. We are here to innovate, not the regulator. So just relying on regulation to come in will always be a step behind where we could actually be. I think it needs to be a cultural shift, and obviously with bigger organizations that's slightly more difficult, but an example is Zumo. We have our core values, and environmental and sustainability is one of them, and it's kind of, you can feel it throughout the company. Decisions we make, types of transport we take to our all hands, everything plays into it, and we talk about it in a very transparent way so everybody is aware why we are doing, what the benefits of the products that we are building actually are. But it's not an easy solution, but I do think that for innovation to be driven by the companies, that cultural shift needs to happen. And I think more and more companies are aware of that and actually embracing sustainability as part of their USP and part of their DNA. So it isn't just an afterthought, but you start building from the grounds up, thinking about sustainability.
I think I'll just add to that to answer your question too. It's very interesting because this cultural shift is happening, and I strongly believe that it is a generational driven shift. Younger generation deeply care about sustainability. We did a survey within Zumo in 2021, and over 80% of the people that we surveyed said that they would choose a crypto wallet, that had sustainable value over one that didn't. So already the consumer mindset is changing. But then from how do we push more company to do that? I think that it will be driven by the consumer, as Edward said. But the second is investors will start asking for it, because investors know that right now, you might be using sustainability as a nice to have. You push it on the side, but if you don't have it in the future, your company will most likely not exist at all, because the consumer won't choose you, the investors will not want to invest into you, and you won't be able to attract talents. We certainly see that talents are coming to us because we have strong sustainability values. We leave behind it, and we're able to advocate for, we are able to demonstrate every single action that we take. So in terms of short answer would be more education on the benefits from a company perspective. Why should they choose sustainability for themselves and for their future? The consumer, continuing to encourage the consumer to be able to make the good choices.
I will now intercede. Thank you very much. It was very informative. Definitely we would need more time to cover everything. But again, thank you very much. So I would say well-deserved applause.